Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everyone. So today we are going to speak about a very interesting topic, and it's a kind of timely topic that everyone needs to know about it. So the topic is a kind of timely and worthy topic: murdering minds, Israelis targeting of Palestinian education. So today we will be hosting Dr. Ibrahim Simeri from Gaza. Dr. Ibrahim is a Palestinian researcher and educator based in Gaza. He's affiliated with Isra University. He holds a PhD in applied linguistics from University of Malaysia, specializing in translation and linguistic, and also he focused on social linguistic, scholasticide, academic reliance, and the impact of conflict on education. So let's start and hear from our friend and colleague, Dr. Ibrahim.
You are most welcome, Dr. I think it's very nice to talk with you today about a very important topic about the genocide in Gaza, the patterns of the genocide in Gaza. You know, as Carmen Abulsi, who coined the term Palestine in 2009, and also Professor Nur Masalha, who coined minoricide in 2015, and another, professors who coined a lot of terms that happen in Gaza, like political side, Palestinian side, future side, minor side. All these terms are coined to explain what is happening in Gaza, not just in the genocide in 2023 that started on October, the 7th of October. It started from 1948.
Yes, that's true. So, Dr. Ibrahim, referring to your article, you wrote an article uh, that published at the International Journal of Palestine Studies, uh, supported and published by the Hashem Sani Center at University of Malaya. So that your article was talking about murdering minds, Israeli systematic targeting of Palestinian scholars, and its impact on Palestinian higher education. Case study of IUG, Islamic University of Gaza. So how you managed to gather this data and this information from the student, and was it easy to manage to meet the student, whether face to face or in which way, which mood you managed to meet the student and to collect the data from them?
Actually, under the war conditions, collecting the data is considered as very challenging, and it's very hard, very difficult, because even the students and the professors are moving from time to time, displaced from place to place. So every time when they are moving from place to place, they are, compulsory to start from zero, and they need time to adapt to the new environment. They need to find a place for, electricity and internet, and that in the war or the genocide, the electricity and the internet were, cut by the Israeli forces and the Israeli, military. So I made, a semi-structured interviews. I sent them by email, via email, to 3 scholars from the IUG and 3, students, master level. And I waited a long time for their response because they are not available anytime online. Sometimes I waited weeks and, to collect these responses.
True. That's true. Yeah, I used to live there, and the situation is really horrible, and uh, I can feel how suffer you are suffering, how difficult the situation you are living in right now, because you're still in Al Mawasi or in Dir al right now.
Now at Al-Mawasi, Al-Karara Mawasi. It's near Khamis.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah. I know that area. I used to live there for a few days. May Allah bless you and protect you. So, Dr. Ibrahim, let's move to the next question. Uh, as a researcher currently living in Gaza, how has your daily intellectual life changed since October 7th? And what does it mean in practical terms to continue thinking, researching, and teaching under these conditions?
Since October 2023, my intellectual life continued, but in a very different way than before. I actually published more papers during this period than I did before the genocide. I finished my PhD, passed my Viva, and kept working academically, but all of this happened while we were being displaced again and again. Every time we moved, I have to start from zero, find shelter for my family, basic needs for my children, and then look for any place with electricity and internet just to continue working. What also changed during this time is that my work became more connected internationally. I formed research collaboration with scholars from different countries, both from the West and the East. Most of my papers were co-authored with researchers, most of them I have never seen or I have never met in person, but who reviewed my work, joined my projects, and supported research focused on Palestine. If you look at my publications, you will see names from different academic backgrounds and institutions working together on this topic. I mean, Palestine. The truth is, what pushed me every day was the feeling that nothing is guaranteed. Life around us was very close and very uncertain. Death felt ever present, and I could die at any moment. You don't wake up feeling that tomorrow is normal or secure. So I used to work every day as if this might be my last chance to write, to think, to finish something important. There were moments when I couldn't function at all. In the first months, I had to rebuild myself mentally just to be able to sit, and work again, to accept what was happening and still try to continue and keep on. And I want to become honest here. I'm not better than anyone else around me. Many people are suffering far more than I am, and many have lost their lives. What I did was not special in that sense. It was just what I could do with a rule I found myself in. But despite everything, I kept going, writing, researching, and building academic work, even in fragments, even under very difficult conditions. And maybe the only thing I can say is this. In moments like these, you realize the human beings can still create, still think, and still connected globally when they hold onto purpose, even in the hardest circumstances. I think I have a problem with hearing you, Dr. Muhammad.
You hear me now, Doctor?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I really can feel what you narrate just now, because I remember the days I were in Gaza and how I used to suffer with my family, with my kids. It was really horrible situation. Yes, and now when you just start narrating your stories, I feel like it was yesterday for me and my family.
That's true.
May Allah protect you, and one day you will be outside of Gaza, inshallah, so we can help to rebuild Gaza, inshallah, together.
Inshallah, inshallah.
So next question, Dr. Ibrahim. To what extent Do universities in Gaza still function today? Not formally, but in reality. And are there any remaining structure from this university are sustained as an academic life?
You know, this is a very difficult question, but I will try to answer this question. You know, in formal terms, universities in Gaza still exist. They retain their names, some administrative presence, and institutional identity. However, their operational reality is extremely limited. The functioning of higher education has been severely disrupted by widespread destruction and continuous displacement. You know, a very large proportion of university infrastructure has been damaged or destroyed, which makes normal academic activity extremely difficult. But even more critical than infrastructure is human factor. Many professors, lecturers, and academic staff have been killed and assassinated, displaced, or unable to continue their academic roles. This has created a major loss in academic capacity that cannot be quickly replaced. As a result, universities are operating in a highly fragmented way, only partially maintaining some academic functions and far from their normal educational goals. The students are also facing significant psychological pressure, instability, and disruption, which further affects learning and engagement. So the reality is, that academic life exists, but in a very constrained and fragile form. The main challenge now is not only, rebuilding infrastructure, but rebuilding the human academic ecosystem of higher education.
Yes, yes, you're right. I can see the most critical point here is targeting the intellectual people, targeting the huge mindset that we used like 20, 30, 40 years back experience to build, and now they have been targeted. So they are erasing actually the Palestinian culture, the Palestinian identity, which take years and years to rebuild again. Not only construction, because the construction it's not difficult to build to rebuild, but to rebuild the intellectual identity, to rebuild the minds that has been erased. It's a different
Absolutely,
story.
yes. Yes, absolutely.
So, Dr. Ibrahim, when supervision and mentorship are interrupted, how are students in your university or in the institution you are working in continue their academic journey? Are there any alternatives form of knowledge transmission?
When supervision and mentorship are interrupted, regular academic follow-up becomes very rare, and in many cases inconsistent. Because of the gap, some creative solutions have emerged. In some cases, professors and doctors from different countries volunteer to supervise students remotely. This, this gives the student access to different academic perspectives and sometimes even strengthens their learning experience because they are exposed to other cultures and ways of thinking. So I think this a positive thing about what's happened. In the middle of the negative, all these negativity. At the same time, the students and academics try to adapt through online communication tools, mobile applications whenever possible, although access is still unstable and not always reliable. So supervision has shifted from a stable, structured system into something more fragmented, but also partially global and adaptive, depending on available conditions.
Hmm. That's interesting. At least they still have some kind of mentorship, maybe in other forms than what we are experiencing outside Gaza, but they're still having and equipping with their own mentorship. So that's very, very interesting. we often hear about what we call online learning as a solution. How realistic is this in Gaza, given the issue of electricity shortages and connect connectivity issues, and also the displacement, the daily displacement? How you manage to have online learning?
Online learning is often presented as a solution, but in Gaza, it's very limited in reality. The basic problem is electricity and internet. They are unstable, sometimes not available at all. And even when they are available, you often have to pay for them in private places. And the cost is very high because access is rare, so not every student can afford it. Because of that, students can't really rely on online learning in a consistent way. Sometimes they connect from mobile phones or temporary places when they can, but it's not stable enough for proper study. So in practice, online learning is not a real alternative. It's more of a partial support that works only in very limited situations. That's why many students still depend on offline materials and peer learning because that's often more realistic for them in these conditions.
Yep, that's true. Yeah, that's true. So, how does this prolonged exposure to war and this ongoing war condition and genocide condition in Gaza affect the ability to scholars, or affect the ability of scholars and the student to think critically, concentrate, and produce knowledge?
These conditions affect both students and scholars deeply. It's not just instruction, it's fear, hunger, and grief at the same time. When someone is dealing with fear or even basic survival, concentrations becomes very difficult for students. Learning is interrupted for scholars. Research losses continuity. Repeated displacement makes it worse. Each time you move, you start again, and that is very exhausting. So thinking and knowledge production became fragmented. It's not about ability, it's about the weight of these conditions.
Yes, that's true. So, what do you see as the most irreversible damage to the Palestinians' higher education, not in terms of infrastructure, but in terms of intellectual ecosystems and disciplinary continuity?
First of all, I don't really see anything as completely irreversible. I
Hmm.
think there are things that are extremely difficult to recover, but not impossible. What I would say is the most difficult loss is the loss of some elite scholars, people who were at a very high academic level and were killed or taken out or assassinated uh, by the Israeli, forces. People like Sufyan Abu Taiha, who was leading academic figure at the Islamic University of Gaza, along with Rifat Al Arir, and many others who had exceptional knowledge and international recognition in their fields. The issue is not only losing individuals, but losing minds that took decades to build through research, teaching, and academic leadership. Replacing that kind of intellectual depth takes a very long time. At the same time, there is also serious disruption in the academic ecosystem itself. Students are moving toward graduation without fully stable foundations. I mean, the abilities. Because of interrupted learning, fragmented online education, and continuous instability, so is the gap between what was expected from graduates and what the system has actually been able to provide. But I still don't see this is the end as the end of the story. I believe difficult conditions do not only destroy, they also reshape. With time, stability, and support, it is still possible to rebuild and even to develop the new forms of knowledge and the new generations, of scholars. I don't hear you, Doctor. I think there is a problem on the part.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
I think yes, you're right. This is the most critical problem that we are facing, and I think we can manage to solve it. We will be able to manage to solve it, inshallah. So this is not a kind of critical thing. And as you mentioned, for Palestine, there is nothing called impossible or
Yes.
called irreversible. We still can do it, inshallah, and we would be
Inshallah.
able to rebuild Gaza, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Uh, you frame education as a form of resistance in your speech. So, in practical terms, what does resistance through education look like under condition of ongoing genocide where infrastructure is entirely destroyed?
For me, resistance through education is not something simple or abstract. It's very practical. It means students' continuity or continuing to study even when the system around them is collapsing. It means teachers trying to stay connected with their students in any way possible, even if it's irregular or limited. Also means small, peer groups formed to keep learning alive with formal structure are no longer working. In reality, it's also a struggle over awareness. It's a matter of awareness. Many people here feel this is not only a material or physical struggle, but also a struggle over consciousness and knowledge. Despite all the difficulties, the students and academics continue to learn and seek knowledge because awareness itself becomes a form of strength. And there is an important idea here. It's not a shame to fall, but it is a shame to give up. So students and scholars fall and rise again over and over, trying again despite everything. And that sense education becomes part of resistance, not as a slogan, but as a lived practice. When conditions try to limit learning, continuing to learn becomes a response. When there is an attempt to weaken awareness, insisting on knowledge becomes a form of resistance. So it's about resistance, staying aware, staying educated, and continuing to try even under a very difficult conditions under your side.
Yes, indeed, Dr. Ibrahim. Yep. You hit the nail right on the head. I agree with you. What you mentioned is exactly what's happening in Gaza right now. Uh, one more question regarding the words you mentioned, because you just mentioned some kind of uh, distinct word. You mentioned or you introduced mindocide as a central analytical concept in your paper that published by the center. How do you differentiate mindocide clearly from the existing frameworks such as educide or scholasticide? And what are the empirical criteria would you allow us to identify mendocide as a distinct, measurable phenomena rather than rhetorical expression?
This is a very important question because it pushes us to be precise rather than just conceptual. Existing frameworks like stochasticide or edicide daily focus on the destruction of education system, on the education system, universities, schools, infrastructure, and also the people who are part of the system, that
Mhm.
system, like students, teachers, and scholars. So they describe the collapse of education as a system. What I'm trying to introduce with my insight is not a replace to these concepts, but to look at different layers from different angles. It focuses more on what happens with the intellectual and cognitive, you know, continuity inside the system over time, especially the continuity of advanced and elite academic production. In other words, what happens to the ability to think, to produce knowledge, and to sustain high-level academic work under long and extreme disruption. And that's it's related to the specific targeting of what I would call the elite layer of scholars and researchers, those who carry advanced knowledge production, leadership, and research, and long-term mentorship in their fields. When this layer is repeatedly assassinated and targeted, it affects not only the individuals, but the entire chain of knowledge, production, and recovery in the future after the genocide. Like any society, after the war, the elite, the scholars, the smart people who lead the recovery and the rebuilding. When the Israeli forces killing these people, then after the war, who will build or rebuild the society? So they are forbidden you in the future from the recovery and rebuilding. Empirically, this is not something major, not a single event. It appears as a pattern over time, targeting the elite, interrupted academic careers, loss of research continuity, we can say breakdown of mentorship between generations, and the weakening of sustained high-level intellectual output inside the university. So I didn't present my side as a competing concept, but as an analytical extension. It tries to capture the cognitive and intergenerational dimension of education and instruction that is not always, visible with you when we only look at the institution.
This,
But I cannot hear you.
can you hear me now?
Yes. I think the problem comes again. I cannot hear you.
How about now?
Yes. Now, yes.
Okay. So this is very interesting, Dr. Ibrahim, because as you mentioned, the word mind aside, so it actually differentiates.
I don't hear you. No, I didn't hear you.
What about now?
Yes, well,
This is very good. So, referring to your point word, which is mind aside, I can see, like, as you mentioned, so scholasticide and what we call
inside.
scholasticide and educide are actually focusing on the institution, education institutions.
Yeah,
However, not focusing on the intellectual people themselves.
yes. So herbicide and scholasticide, scholasticide coined by Carter in 2009. It's talking about the educational system, the whole educational system. You know, but mind design is taught by minds. There is a systemic targeting of great minds or shining minds in the Palestinian community. So they are choosing who is smart, who's brilliant, who has affected the world. Like Rifat Al Arain, who can connect globally, can send information from Gaza about the genocide. So they are look carefully about these people. They are not targeting anyone. They look at the professors, special professors who are considered are a high level of education, a high producer of knowledge. They are connected globally. They have they have friends outside. They can affect the global opinion. So they are choosing these people. They are targeting these people. Even these people do not belong to any movement or organization. His crime that he is smart, he is brilliant, and he is producing knowledge. So the Israeli, monsters want to forbid you in the future, and what's I call it future side. They want to kill your future. Who built the society? Smart people, the elite, after the war. They fight you now, but they are also fight you in the future by these tools, by killing these layer of people. They are the elite. Any country around the world, the recovery, carry out through these people. So in the future, when inshallah the war ends, we will face a so serious problem because our leadership, our intellectual scholars, most of them are assassinated by the Israeli forces. Until now, if they can see anyone as a threat or anyone produce knowledge, they will attack him directly without any, caring about the international law, human rights, or the freedom of speech. So the Israeli forces for a long time tried to destroy everything considered as a Palestinian. And professors like Masalha I talked about memory side. They want to destroy the collective memory of the Palestinians by changing the names of the villages, places, streets, like this. And also like scholasticide, eticide, and politicide, and other terms are carried out on, the Palestinians through or for ages. So what is happening in Gaza is a collection of catastrophes put in one package and they throw it on Gaza. In the history or through the history, I dare any historian or researcher to find that all these catastrophes or problems came together
One
to one
nation.
place, to one nation at the same time. Displacement, killing, assassination, taking the lands, occupation, hunger, starvation, no electricity, no water, no food, no internet. You cannot move. You know, in the First World War and in the Second World War, the people they can move from country to country. They
Yep.
can move to, they can move to safe zones. But in our case, we cannot. They ask us to move, for example, to Rafah soon. They said, this is a safe zone. We go there, they attack us, they target us. So it's like, give you punches everywhere, and you cannot say no. You cannot say this is illegal. You cannot say this is a violation of the human rights and the United Nations laws. You cannot say anything. Even some people say we want to move to another place, safe place. They forbid us from doing this. They just want you to die and vanish. The good Palestinian, for them, the dead Palestinian.
Yes.
Just like that.
It's true. True. Thank you so much, Dr. Ibrahim, for mentioning this and emphasizing this point. So, if you were to expand your study that we are talking about right now, what additional methodological approach, such as corpus analysis, institutional data, or longitudinal tracking, would strengthen your argument? How you would expand it?
So I think maybe I can make a book about
Hmm.
about this issue. Because the Palestinian community deserve to register what's happening. Maybe after 2 decades or 3 decades, the people will never know about what's happening to or what's happened to the Palestinians.
Sure.
So I think also the main way to strengthen the study to follow students over time, not just capture one moment. That would give a clearer picture of how their academic journey is changing under these conditions. I would also try to relay more university level data, like how many students continue, how many students drop out or complete their courses to understand the scale of the impact in a more structured way. Another thing I find important is to look closely at students' own work, how they write, how they express ideas, because that can show how their academic thinking is being affected. And of course, I would go deeper into interviews to really understand their experiences beyond numbers. So the idea is to combine different approaches to see both the durable changes and the human side of the experience.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ibrahim. So I think the time is moving very fast. Let's jump to our last question. Despite everything, what gives you confidence that intellectual life in Gaza can be rebuilt in the near future?
Honestly, what gives me confidence is faith and resilience. For us, this is not a normal situation or a normal challenge. It's a question of existence. It's not to succeed or not. It's to be or not to be. And when it reaches that level, people do not give up. They continue. I trust I trust Palestinian community, students and scholars, because even now they are still trying to learn, to teach, and to stay connected to knowledge despite everything. So my confidence comes from that, from people who refuse to stop because they simply cannot. We cannot stop. We cannot give up. I think I cannot hear you, Doctor.
Can you hear me, Doctor, now?
Yes.
So this is exactly what we want to learn and what we want to hear from you, Dr. Ibrahim. Thank you so much for mentioning this and for narrating this powerful and thought-provoking discussion. So today session has reminded us that the destruction of education goes far beyond infrastructure. It affects knowledge, it affects mentorship, it affects the future of the entire intellectual communities in Gaza. So at the time, we have also seen remarkable resilience of scholars, students, and continuing people under extremely difficult situation in Gaza. So this places an important responsibility on all of us, especially within the global academic community, to reflect on how we can contribute meaningfully. On behalf of University of Malaya and Hashim Sani Center for Palestinian Studies, thank you very much, and thank you to our speaker, to our audience, and to everyone who managed to join or to listen us today. Thank you so much, and we look forward to continuing this